you end up losing yourself.
Oh, 100%.
And you don't want to lose yourself in the name of people pleasing and then call it kindness.
Yeah.
And it's all a lie.
Because at the end of the day, guess who's the main character of your story? You are. You're not the main character of anyone else's story.
Never been the right time, like we're holding back the storyline. And I'm waiting at the end of the night, thinking of you.
Welcome back to the Call Your Mom podcast. We're so excited you're here. Today's subject is on people pleasing. And I know I have struggled with that.
Same. That is something that took me years to realize I had a big habit of that.
I think everyone does. They have a little bit of sense of people pleasing in them. And it's really sad because, and it's also a good thing. So don't get me wrong. It could be a good thing in the sense because we care for people, right? That is your heart. That's deep down. That is essentially what it is. But it also can be a bad thing because you won't set boundaries and put blocks in places to protect yourself, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think part of people pleasing starts when we're young. I think people pleasing starts when we are small because we are trained to be liked. We want to be liked. And so we find ourselves agreeing with people. We find, also like good girl, good boy, good job. We want to get those accolades. So I think it kind of is rooted in us.
It's true. It's true. Especially if you grew up with you grew up a certain way where you feel like your family is praising you or is you then have this tendency to be like, okay, I have to perform at a certain level all the time. I know that's what I struggled with. Not that my mom was that way.
Oh,
My mom actually accepted us fully, but what I struggled was with my dad because my dad always saw certain things to be value in the business world. So when he told me to choose between piano and singing, I was like, but I love both, but none of those are going to make money. But how do you know?
yes. And I think that's one of the hardest things to shake is actually people pleasing of our parents because that's the first people we're born with in order to want to people please. And then we go into school and then we have all our peers, right? And our teachers because we get the gold star, we get to be we get to be the line leader, right? And so you want to be, I think it all is rooted in acceptance and wanting to be liked. And ultimately it's rooted in wanting to be loved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we all want to feel loved, heard, seen, right?
Yeah.
And we will essentially do anything to make that happen. And then people overstep boundaries. They don't, and we don't prioritize ourselves in our lives. And that carries all the way into adulthood. That can carry into relationships. That can carry into your career.
Yeah.
I mean, I've struggled with that in my career because I want to outperform, in every aspect of my life, right? And I always have great ideas and I always show up 100%. But I always need to remember, I also need rest. I also need to live my own life. And you've done a really good job of teaching me that. And honestly, it's hard to handle all the pressures of life. And throwing people into the mix of that, oh my gosh.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we're not wanting to disappoint.
Yeah.
We don't want to disappoint other people. And so then we find ourselves putting ourselves on the back burner because we don't want to disappoint other people. But then ultimately what happens? We disappoint ourselves.
We do. We disappoint ourselves. Okay, so what is one of your first experiences you feel like you have? If you could go back in time, what's the first experience you've had with people pleasing that you could remember off the top of your head?
I would definitely, the first thing that pops into my mind is, well, there's a couple, but I could say that I was a figure skater. And so looks were a big thing. Being, a certain size was a big thing. And I remember wanting to be whatever it is my coaches wanted me to be. And I remember being so upset when I couldn't be a certain size for one of my coaches. And I remember her calling me fat. And that to me was one of the things that I can remember, that people pleasing. I wanted to be so badly. I even found a journal one time that I don't even remember how, I was very young, probably like 12, 10, 12. And I was like writing about how, I just want, if I could just stop doing, eating enough or whatever, I would be able to make my coach be really, really happy because then I would be that certain size or whatever. And I think that kind of was one of the times that kind of just popped into my head right now when you asked me. But yeah, it starts early.
It does start early. And actually, what's funny? As you were talking, I was thinking back on my life and I was like, I was a really strong-willed child. I was very strong-willed. And I'm like, wait, when is the time that I people please as a child? Actually, it didn't come to me until I was older, a little bit older, because I kind of just bulldozed my way through things.
No, not you.
I did tell everyone what to do, and I did control every situation, and I did have contracts with my friends at the age of 7. So if you relate to me, let me know. But yeah, I didn't get that way until I was probably a teen. But when you're a teen, right, you notice everything about yourself that is wrong. And for me, it was the fact that I couldn't wear bikinis, and that was abnormal. And I had braces. And yeah, those were the 2 things that really stood out to me. And I was like, "Ugh," just, waiting until I could get my braces off. And like, that was like, I didn't want to smile or I didn't want to do certain things, right? That was like the first time I'd recognize like having that kind of insecurity. And then I got my braces off. And let me tell you guys, I went back to my sassy self. I'm just joking.
And she's never stopped. I mean, let's be real. She's always been sassy. She'll always be sassy. And that's what makes her great.
Yeah. Thanks, Mom.
You're welcome.
But yeah, that's honestly, I think into my teens and into my adulthood is when I started to people please. And I started to prioritize it over my own needs, right? So I went into college thinking that if I did this one career or if I become this one thing, that is what's going to make in my hurt and in my trauma, my dad notice me and give me praise, right? And I'd get that like accolade, right? And short story now, I'm not a lawyer.
No.
I'm an entrepreneur actually in
Yes.
very many ventures. And I didn't go that route, but I have succeeded in my own ways. And I've become more of a businesswoman than I ever thought. But if I didn't let go of that people pleasing, if I didn't let go of that need to feel wanted, I would have never discovered some of the things about myself that I'm doing today.
Absolutely. I wanted to know how old were you when you first discovered like, wow, people pleasing is a problem for me?
I would say like 17.
Oh, okay.
16, 17. Because I didn't really you did a really good job keeping things away from us. Like even body image things. I didn't feel the need to be skinnier. I didn't feel the need to be, to fit in a certain way. I didn't need to feel the need to dress a certain way. I was always wanting to be the person in the room that like, even up till I was 16 or 17, it'd be like posting what I was wearing online. Like, this is what I'm wearing today. Who's wearing this, right? But until I would say like 17, 16, when it started to have the conversation around college and what you're going to do with your life, is when I started to feel that pressure of people pleasing.
Okay.
Interesting enough. And then in my own trauma, I would say when the divorce started to settle in, would be in making sure everyone else's needs were met before mine.
Okay. Yeah. That makes so much sense. I think for me, it took me until my late 30s, almost 40. Yikes. But that's because I was so busy making sure everybody else was happy that I didn't even have time to focus on myself and realize how broken I was. And it's easy to be a people pleaser when you're just, you're raising kids, you're doing everything, you have a husband. And I think for me, from the time I was a child, like I said, I never wanted to rock the boat. I, came from a very traumatic childhood. And so for me, Holly's the good one. Holly's the nice one. I just kept everything copacetic. And I carried that into my marriage. I carried that into my adult friendships. And I was so afraid to tell people, no, that's not okay with me. No, I'm sorry, I can't do that today. I'm really tired and I just don't have the energy. And it took me till I was about 37-ish, I think, 38, to really realize, wow, I really do prioritize other people over myself. And I think it's such an important thing for young women to start to realize that it's okay to have boundaries. It's okay to say, hey, no, not today, and not even follow up with another explanation, because no is a complete sentence sometimes. And I just wanted to say I'm so proud of you that you recognized it so early on, and that you've started making proactive steps toward creating your own boundaries.
Oh, thanks, Mom.
You're welcome.
Well, you've taught me a lot. And I think with my career choice, I would say as an entrepreneur, it's really hard to say no, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you want to show up the best for your clients. And that is actually where I struggle the most with my people pleasing to this day. And I think a lot of people, whether you have a 9 to 5, you're an entrepreneur, or you're a content creator or writer, whatever it is, it's hard to say no sometimes. And no is a full sentence. And that includes in your career, especially as women, as we get into our 30s. I'm 27 in my late 20s.
I can only wish to be back there, let me tell you.
Your career is such a big deal. It's such a big deal. And I think about it and I'm like, okay, I want to show up my best. I want to do this. But am I, putting my health on the back? Am I putting my relationships on the back end? Am I putting my, I'm not actually putting other things that are going to help me live a fulfilled life first, because I'm so busy focusing on my career. And that includes with people pleasing other people, making sure I show up in ways or going overboard for them. And sometimes you just need a break and you just need to be.
So I want to ask you a quick question. How have you created boundaries without feeling guilty? How has that worked out for you? How do you do it?
So funny you say that, because I was going to ask you the same thing.
Well then.
For myself, I am struggling with this right now.
Okay.
I have a lot of various projects going on in my life that I'm very passionate about in all certain areas. So creating boundaries is super hard for me because I'll work forever. I'm a little bit of a workaholic. So ways I've done this is prioritizing workouts. So prioritizing my health, whether that's weightlifting, whether that's yoga, whether that's a walk outside. The second thing I've done is rescheduling my days into blocks. My business mentor calls them genius blocks.
I love that, by the way.
I love it too. The other thing is, instead of saying I don't have time for something or I need to prioritize this person, start asking yourself, how can I make this happen? How can I put this in my day? Because you're not giving yourself a solution when you just say, I have to do this. You're not giving yourself a solution, right? You need to tell your brain how to give yourself the solution. And that's what I'm figuring out right now. So how am I going to make time for myself? Another thing I did is I got a membership with my mom to the Burke Williams Spa.
Oh my gosh. It's the best.
Okay, so how are you prioritizing boundaries in your life?
So the way I've learned to prioritize boundaries without feeling guilt, which I don't think all the time I don't feel guilt. I think it's inevitable you're going to feel guilty, because I just think it's so ingrained in us to want to please people, to not disappoint or let down the people we love, right? And I think one of the things that I've had to do is really realize that what I need to do for myself really has nothing to do with what the other person is thinking about me saying no. So whatever they're thinking, it's none of my business, because my business is realizing that I need to make myself a priority and I need to have boundaries so that I can actually show up in that person's life as the best version of myself. And I think we forget that. I think we forget that when we are so busy, helping people and running after people and doing things for people and putting everybody first, we're pouring out, pouring out, pouring out. We forget to pour back into ourselves. And when we actually show up for other people or for the things we want to do in our lives, we find ourselves resentful. We find ourselves without energy. We find ourselves, not wanting to be there. And I think that's part of how I've created a way of, creating boundaries without feeling guilt, is letting myself know, or telling myself, remembering to say to myself, hey, you can't pour from an empty vessel. You can't show up for the people you love as the best version of you without pouring back into you. So sometimes you're going to have to say no.
And honestly, that goes with my career stuff. I mean, that's where I'm struggling the most with people pleasing. And I can't actually show up creatively, strategically at all if I don't pour back into myself.
Absolutely. And that's the other thing. You burn out and you can't do things to the best of your ability because you're just tired and you're just done. And the last thing you want to do is to keep doing more.
Yes, exactly. And that could go for anything. I mean, even people, friends, whatever it is. I mean, I think a huge trend on the internet right now is all this health stuff, right? Everyone's like, do this healthy thing, do this healthy thing. Actually, there is a thing of just setting a boundary when it comes to your health, whether that is giving information from your family, getting information from the internet, getting information from your friends, because it is kind of a sense of people pleasing, right? If you constantly like, okay, I'm going to try this because this person suggested this person suggested this. Sometimes you just need to take a look in the mirror and do what's just best for you.
Absolutely. 100%. And I think one of the hardest things for many of us to do is recognize the difference between, are we people pleasing or are we just being kind? What's the difference there? So how do we recognize that? Like, how do we recognize if we're just being nice and it's really out of a place of kindness, or are we just overexerting ourselves to be liked, to be accepted, to be loved, and we're just burning ourselves out? What's the difference? How do you tell the difference between that?
The difference between that, oh gosh,
That's hard, right?
it's really hard because it's a fine line.
I agree.
Because especially between you and I, we have really big hearts. So we're constantly pouring into people. I believe in pouring into people. I believe in giving back. I think the boundary is when you physically and mentally and spiritually are tapped out. Like, you have to remember, it goes back to what you said, you can't pour from an empty cup. So you need to actually fill up your cup, make sure it's filled so that you can pour back into other people, right? You can literally picture a glass of water. And if there was a little bit of water in there and you're trying to pour into other cups, it's not going to work, right?
No.
You need a full cup to pour back into other people. And I think that's an easy way to distinguish is when you are actually getting physically, mentally, spiritually tired from trying to please a person or trying to show up in a way, then there's something wrong there. You're showing up for the wrong reason.
Absolutely. And I think too, for me, I'm like, is this person an energy vampire? Is this a person that is coming to me to suck all the energy out of me? So we have to I always say categorize people. I hate to say it, but we kind of have to put certain people in their categories. So then we know, like, okay, this person has come to me a million times for this. And now at this point, it's not about kindness. Now I'm just doing it out of just being a people pleaser because I don't want to hear, you're a mean person, you're not a nice person, or whatever it is. And then I'm going back and feeling like, I'm so irritated that I, keep crossing my own boundaries because I don't want to disappoint this other person, but now I'm disappointing myself. And I think that's one of the biggest cues to knowing the difference between, is it kindness or is it people pleasing? I think sometimes when we start pushing aside, one of the ways that I know is if I'm pushing away the things that I want to do and replacing it with the things that other people want me to do, I know that I'm people pleasing. And I think another thing is if it's crossing my boundaries, then I know that I'm people pleasing. And it's not just being kind. I'm actually just in a place of people pleasing.
Yep, that's true. That's a great way of putting it, right?
Yeah.
It's not setting that boundary and being like, and like I said, being exhausted spiritually, mentally, whatever it may be. You're then putting people's needs above what you need, and you can't pour from that glass, right? And it's also to fulfill something inside of you that you feel like you're missing. I actually think people pleasing is a little bit of selfish
Oh, do tell.
because people pleasing, right, is
Okay.
something that you need to feel. You need to feel something because
Mhm.
you need to feel maybe it's loved, maybe it's wanted, maybe it's needed. So people pleasing comes down to being selfish because ultimately it's what you need, not what the other person needs. So if it's too, that's hard, another fine line between kindness and people pleasing because there's some things that you just genuinely want to give out of your heart, right? I'm a giving person. I love to give my time, right? But if I'm trying to show up in my career in multiple ways and I'm going overboard because I'm trying to, right, show up a certain way, I'm going to get tired. And then guess what? Just because my goal was to look a certain way, I'm not even able to give 100% in that area just because I wanted to feel cool or I wanted to feel, get that accolade or I wanted to ride the ladder up, right?
Mhm.
And it's selfish in the end. And I hate to say that, but I
No.
also think it's the honest opinion.
No, that's a total epiphany. And I absolutely love what you just said because it is so true. Because we do feed our emotions a lot and we do like that external praise. And it's so important, especially the day in social media. Like we want those hearts, we want the tap, tap, tap heart, right? And I think, and we want the good comments. And I think that we're a very emotion driven society at this point. And I think that's just innate in our nature as human beings. So I totally agree with you on that. I think, yes, it brings us to an external, like, look at me. Yay, I feel so
Yes.
good now. And then ultimately we end up burning out and we're like, I don't really feel that great.
Yeah. And then you lose yourself.
Yes,
You end up
totally.
losing yourself.
Yeah.
And whether that's a relationship, your career, your family, your friends, you end up losing yourself.
Oh, 100%.
And you don't want to lose yourself in the name of people pleasing and then call it kindness.
Yeah.
And it's all a lie.
Because at the end of the day, guess who's the main character of your story? You are. You're not the main character of anyone else's story.
Nope.
So people pleasing only makes the other person truly, truly happy.
Okay. So, what advice would you give to your younger self about people pleasing?
Oh, wow. What advice would I give my
Actually, I'm
younger
going to
self?
spice this up a little bit.
All right.
What would you say to a woman who's in there? Maybe we're going to go generation by generation real quick.
All right. All right.
Okay, 20s. They're in their 20s. What would you say about a girl who's in her 20s, trying to figure out life? Maybe she's a people pleaser.
I would again say make yourself the main character of your own story. I would say sit down and ask yourself what your values are, what it is that you want to do ultimately with your life. You may not have it all figured out, but we all have bucket lists. We all have maybes. Figure out who you want to be. So who you want to be as a person. I think a lot of times we make to-do lists, but we forget to make to-be lists about who we want to show up in the world as. And then I would say that with people pleasing, anybody that causes you to step outside of that and shrink yourself down and not be able to move forward toward the things you want and who you want to be, they're not the people for you. And it's okay to tell them no. And it's okay to have boundaries. And if they get upset, that's their issue. That is not yours. The way you say no, the delivery I always say, is your job. And how someone receives it is their job. And I would say, don't let anyone get in the way of that because that's the time for you. That
Oh
is
my-
the time for you.
I love that. I
Yeah.
love that. And you took the words out my mouth. That is literally how I feel. And I'm in my 20s. But if I were to look back, I know a lot of people pleasing for me was actually finding a guy.
Oh gosh, yes. Every girl.
If I were to talk to a girl in her 20s, I'm married now and very happily married. But if I were to talk to my younger self, the girl this last 7 years, right? I would say don't make people pleasing a habit when you're trying to find a relationship because that could turn into you losing yourself, losing sight of what you want, trying to become something you're not. And it's a very quick way to get to then your late 20s and be confused about what you want, what your goals are, and what you're looking for in your future. I think as women, we want to feel loved. We want to feel loved so badly. And we could lose ourselves in just trying to please someone else, especially when it comes to our relationships or finding a guy or dating, especially now because now you have apps that you have to swipe and download. I mean, I did all of those apps when I was dating, and that's something that was huge in my people pleasing and definitely difficult. The other thing I would say is for the girl who's stuck at a job that is not fulfilling you and you just want that accolade or you want that goal or you want to reach that ladder, maybe that place isn't for you. And it's okay to jump around. And yeah, grandma's saying that you need this career, or auntie saying that you need to go to this next level, or your friends are making an X amount of dollars and you're not. Who cares? Go figure out what you want to do and stop allowing everyone else's opinions to tell you what to do. And whatever you want to do, go do it. Go try it. If you want to work at an ice cream shop while you're trying to figure out a podcast, or you want to go become, I don't know, a singer, go try it. Why not? In your 20s, you're supposed to go and try things. Don't let people pleasing stop you from doing that.
And on the same coin, when you were talking, because I loved everything you said, I just wanted to say, if you're happy where you're at, I know that some women are in their 20s and they're married and have children and they're mommies and they're so happy. And, you know, we live in a hustle culture that tells them that they need to be doing this, doing that, doing this, doing that. But if you're happy, don't feel you need to people please. Do whatever it is that you're content in and enjoy. And in the same coin, you can stay content and you don't have to people please in that way either. People tend to do it, you know, people please in that direction as well, right?
No, it's so true. I have friends who do that way too. And I'm like, do that too. I'm sorry. And I'm like, you literally have a beautiful family. Who cares? You're making the best of life.
Yes.
Who cares? Right? Yep. It's all about, we all have different journeys, right? And we need to make the most out of it, right? And so that's what I firmly believe. I believe in everything you said. And honestly, this advice applies to anyone. Everything we said can apply. It doesn't have to be your 20s. It could be your 30s. Because some women are dating in their 30s. Some women are having babies in their 30s. It doesn't matter at what age, because any of this applies to that.
It could be 40s, 50s, 60s.
Yeah, again. Have you had a relationship where people pleasing was an issue?
Okay. So, yes. I have had a relationship where people sleep. So I got married to your dad young, and I really didn't know who I was. And like I said, I had a traumatic kind of childhood and upbringing. So, you know, people pleasing was kind of innately in me. And when I got married, I just didn't know who I was. And so I was just agreeable. I didn't really stand for anything. So I kind of fell for everything. And I think that I never fully realized my dreams or the things that I actually wanted to achieve or do, because I was so focused on what he wanted and what everybody else wanted, even in my extended, like my extended family, that I didn't really stand up for myself. And I think that coming out of that, I realized that I had a lot of growing to do, and I never recognized that part of me. And so I think it's a passion of mine to encourage young women, or any women that are in a state of people pleasing, to take a step back and really look at their life and say, is this how I want to run my life? Is this how I want to live?
So my mom, I always say this about my mom. I said, it's kind of funny because I told my mom, when you got divorced, it's like you were thrown back into 1996, right? Remember I used to say that to you all the time?
100%.
You're learning about yourself. And at the time I was young, right? I was, I think, like 20, right?
Yeah.
And when this all was happening, I was actually a little younger, 18, 17. I was like, we kind of walked through some of the similar things in life. because it's like you got thrown back into that. So I watched you walk through things, right? And it helped me go through things. And people pleasing was one of those things I watched you kind of come out of your shell and realize you're like, wait, I don't like how that person responded to me, or I don't like how this family member's treating me, or I don't need to give this person access, even though I forgive them.
Yes.
And that's a huge thing is people, especially family members, forgiveness doesn't mean access. And they expect you to give people access when not necessarily that needs to be in your life.
Yeah. An
right?
offense can be forgiven, but it doesn't mean someone gets to have access back into your life. And so, yes, that's a boundary. That is part of healing from people pleasing, is learning that you don't have to accept everybody back. Yes, I accept your apology, but I don't necessarily want you back into my life. Your behavior was really damaging. And now I need to have a boundary for myself.
Yep. And your family members tend to be the first people to say, well, they're your aunt, or they're your cousin, or they're your uncle. And it's like,
you want to know what my answer is? Then how much more should they treat me better than people outside of my family? If they're my family, they should treat me even better than people that are strangers.
Yep. And they say that about even when you're starting something new, when you're starting a business, you're starting a podcast, you're starting whatever. They're like, you'll actually find that your family are the last people to support you compared to your friends or whatever.
Totally.
And it's so funny because you're right. They should treat you better. And I think overall, right, people pleasing affects us in various different ways. And I think it's something that we need to, work on, right? And it's something you're going to need to learn. You're going to need to unlearn, deprogram your brain how to stop people pleasing, and then understanding what it is your boundaries are and what your boundaries are with. Is this kindness or is this people pleasing? And asking yourself and giving yourself the answer that you need to define what that is. Because it's going to be different for every single person.
And you have to learn to be okay with not being liked. And that is something that's very difficult for the people pleaser. People are once you start changing, people get upset at you.
Yes.
People don't understand. They were used to you being one way, and now all of a sudden you have boundaries. You prioritize yourself. You're prioritizing your life and your values and your goals, and you're not, putting them first. So then a lot of times people get upset with you. So you have to be okay and say, you know what? It's okay that they don't like me right now. It's okay if they never like me, because maybe they're not my person or, my people. Because when those people remove themselves, they're just making space for other people who will appreciate you and who will respect your boundaries and won't expect you to put them first in all you do.
100%. 100%. I agree with everything. I think this podcast episode was so important because every woman struggles with this at one point in her life.
Absolutely.
I don't know one person who hasn't struggled with this in various different elements in their lives. And I'm excited to see how this is going to affect other girls. And I want to know, have you been a people pleaser in your life? Let us know in the comments below. And I want to know some stories, even if you just want to email it to us or send us a DM on Instagram or however you want to communicate with us. We want to know, has this affected you? Has this been something in your life that has challenged you? Because it definitely has challenged us.
Yes.
Right.
I also want to hear from recovering people pleasers. I want to hear how you did it when you recognized, hey, I'm a people pleaser and this needs to change. We want to know about that. We want to hear your story. We want to hear how you create boundaries without feeling guilty, because your story can totally help other women do the same thing.
Yeah, if you could share that in the comments, that'd be great, because it would encourage other people as well. Thank you for hanging out with us today. You can find the full episode on YouTube, and it would really help us out if you'd like and subscribe to us. We love doing this podcast, and that's how we help you.
Also, you can follow us on Instagram, and you can find our podcast on any podcast platform where podcasts are streamed.
And we can't wait to see you next time, because in this space, you're not alone. You can always
call your mom.